Yeah, the people that were here back in the 1860s were here because of copper. One mine after another was developed, and eventually there were probably over 200 different mines. Immigrants came, and many of them were Germans.
It was such a rugged and remote wilderness that there were no congregations really being formed. Being good German Lutherans really desired to have a congregation, a actual trained Lutheran pastor come and serve them.
5 charter members wrote to C.F.W. Walther, the first president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, requesting a trained and licensed pastor. He responded by sending Reverend I.E. Wibben to the Keweenaw in July 1866 to lead the small group of believers.
It was known as the German Church for many, many years, even into the 1960s.
Petri und Pauli, Evangelische Lutherische Gemeinde zu Hancock. It was the first Lutheran church in the Copper Country, maybe in the whole Upper Peninsula.
Reverend Wibben not only led the upstart church, he also started a bilingual school in those early years, doubling as its teacher while nurturing the fledgling congregation. While the young church was off to a strong start, it didn't take long before the congregation and the community faced its first big challenge.
There was a great fire in 1869 in Hancock. The reports state that only 2 or 3 buildings in Hancock at that time were spared from the fire.
And it started in an after-hours party in a house next to the Catholic Church on Quincy Street in Hancock. Someone kicked over a stove, and rather than put the fire out, they all left. The town just burned and burned and burned and burned, and one of the few structures that was left unharmed was St. Peter and Paul Lutheran Church. God was watching us.
I'm sure many were left homeless. Obviously, help was given, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the members were involved with the helping hands at the time.
Even in its formative years, St. Peter and Paul Lutheran Church focused on outreach, and Pastor Carl Ebert made it his mission to reach all corners of the Copper Country.
Pastor Ebert, he went up and down the Keweenaw at least as far as Eagle River. He also went down to Lawrence, and in the wintertime they would travel on the ice with sleds, horse-drawn sleds on the ice. He had quite some adventures in his travels.
Reverend Gottlieb Traub led the church into a new century, expanding its mission outward from Hancock, with preaching stations in communities like Bergland, Topaz, and Tri-Mountain.
They were very active in outreach. We have members to this day that were the products of those preaching stations, or descendants of the preaching stations.
In 1922, Reverend Edward Felcher began what would become nearly 4 decades of service to the congregation, the longest tenure of any pastor at the church. He continued serving local and far-flung communities, some like Hubble and Red Ridge, who now had parishes of their own.
We had our little town of our little church. My father built the altar there and the lectern, and my mother played the pump organ. We had to come down here to go to confirmation. And they have it a lot easier now. We had to say a speech and everything when we got confirmed. That was tough. We were asked all these hard questions. We had to pay attention.
In the 1950s, Pastor Felcher also began campus ministry at Michigan Tech. He formed a student organization modeled after a fraternity, complete with pledges, pins, and eventually a house, a mission that continues to this day.
I came here as a student at Michigan Tech in 1957. The students became an integral part of our worship service, really a fundamental addition to our congregation. Congregational members have adopted students, have them over for dinner and things like that.
My mom and Dorothy Paul and some of the other ladies at the time would get together in the parish hall at the old church and create a meal, put a meal together, and then they would pack it up and drive it over to the student center.
The first Sunday we were in church, a group of college students was in attendance, and my youngest son was about 8 at the time, and he poked me and he said, "Mom, those kids are in church and they don't have a mom waking them up to get them here. But that really impressed my 8-year-old son. He thought that was pretty great.
In the summer, there's almost this empty hole, like we literally missed them and we're longing for them to come back in the fall.
We've been so blessed by young people. They bring their faith and they live their faith and they are an inspiration.
You know, these people from different backgrounds and different age groups really breathing life into one another.
In the late 1990s, Saints Peter and Paul Lutheran Church called a new pastor and entered into an unprecedented period of growth. Growth that eventually led to one of the biggest decisions in the congregation's history.
In 1998, when Pastor Weber came, he energized the congregation in such a way that suddenly people who you had been sitting next to in church for maybe years were speaking to each other before church and after church and hanging around after church, and it infused such energy and such enthusiasm.
A second and third service soon followed, as well as a praise band playing contemporary music.
Small group Bible studies, home Bible studies were started early on when I came here, getting people into the Word.
Things really started flowing and really started flourishing. People really started opening up and getting involved more.
And I think as people joined, they had friends who came to visit and went, gee, this is a place where I can feed my needs. It just kind of kept growing from there.
With the growth of the attendance at St. Peter and Paul, people were moved a little bit out of their comfort zone, but there was never a time when someone wanted to put the brakes on and say, no, we can't make changes, we don't want to do that, we want to stay in the old way.
I can't explain it. It was there, you know. It just went quickly.
It was to the point where we were growing out of the church, but we were also growing out of the parking.
We were really crowded for space. We needed more room. We needed to be able to expand.
A group of people got together and found out that there was some land for sale that maybe we could be purchasing over here, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
In March of 2009, Pastor Weber led the congregation in a split service, beginning at the Hancock home of 142 years, followed by a caravan across the canal, and ending at its new location in Houghton.
I would have to say that the most emotional service I have ever been involved with in my entire ministry of 36, 37 years was closing the doors on the old church and shutting it down and decommissioning it.
That church was jammed. It was standing room only. We did a partial worship service, sang a few hymns, did the rite of closure, removed everything from the altar. Everything that was taken from the church in Hancock was relocated to the church here in the little chapel.
It was very important for me because I was baptized, confirmed, and married in that church. And I can go in there now and I can say, well, you know, we brought everything from that church to this church. So I had Jesus there in my front seat with me, going across the bridge, and everybody honking their horns and looking at me. But it was kind of neat. Pastor Weber said I should have drove through McDonald's at that time and got me a fish sandwich, or got him a fish sandwich. But anyways, we made it safely with the altar over here, and then we put Jesus in our chapel.
The day that we moved into this church was truly an emotional time. It was marvelous. People just poured in here as they arrived, and it was such a level of excitement, and the noise was deafening, and no one wanted to be quiet, and it was just heavenly, and it was wonderful, and the church was packed, and what can I say? We were just thrilled. We were absolutely thrilled to be in a new home.
150 years. You know, you go back to Abraham Lincoln.
If those people had any idea of where we would be today, they wouldn't have believed it.
It's pretty phenomenal that this church is that old.
I think that's pretty neat that we were able to survive for that long and still moving strong forward.
It's just a little freaky to think I've been around for 1/3 of the history of the church.
As God's people, we are truly and fully alive in Christ, and that is pure gospel. It comes through no other means than Jesus Christ alone.
It's a wonderful feeling to know that the Lord is always with you.
This church is just spreading the gospel.
The church really, personally for me, is my family.
I think God put us here for a reason. These people are everything to me.
It is totally the grace of God that this place exists and can do anything in His name.